What's up, everybody, and welcome to Fantasy Football Today DFS. We are continuing our preseason summer series, and we bring back an old friend, a good friend. It's DBRO, Derrick Brown from Fantasy Pros. Derrick, how you doing, buddy?
See, it's always a good time, baby. Anytime we get to talk ball and DFS, man. So just loving life, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Listen, like pricing came out for week one, so
hmm
we're gonna attack that. Listen, it's August, it's early August, and I understand people are like, "Why are we doing this? It's too early. There's going to be injuries." I agree. There's going to be injuries. I agree. There's going to be position battles won and lost, but this is a fun thing to do, Debro. Anytime we get to talk about a slate, I mean, we are 6 months removed from being able to talk about a slate, if not longer. I mean, like you don't mind doing this, right? Like we're
No.
trying to have some fun here a little bit, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of this stuff, depending on what we're going to get through for the entire show, I think there's a lot of that people can take away as far as strategy and not just
Mhm.
like the player takes. And we're going to run through week one pricing and stuff, but not just the player takes, but strategy and I guess some lessons learned throughout DFS throughout the years, man. I think every year is its own like little microcosm of how you're dealing with players, how you're dealing with teams, how you're dealing with lineups, I mean, some of it just how we're dealing with pricing structure and stuff throughout the year as well. So no, I think there's a lot of really good overview, just high level takeaways we're going to get through here that's going to help people to build lineups throughout the entire season and not just for week one.
Yeah, and then I encourage you as we talk about some players for week one at each position, for you to just feel free to interrupt and drop some knowledge, some just general principles that maybe some people can take away. In other words, if I don't tee up for it, feel free to interrupt and kind of throw something in there.
hmm
But that's actually a really good transition. Let's talk about, before we bring up the pricing, let's talk about I want to know what your approach, Derrick Brown from Fantasy Pros, like what's your approach when you're approaching any slate, whether it's week. Well, we can get into that dynamics of week one and two because it's kind of a little bit different than the other weeks, but just your general approach to attacking an NFL slate from a DFS standpoint.
Man, really from top down, you start looking at, and I've always been a player takes guy and a matchups guy. So a lot of how I approach every slate, I know a lot of people, especially in the DFS community, whether using, whether it's using an optimizer, looking at projections. Like I care about projections, but for me, it comes down to looking at matchups
Mhm.
and. I dive super deep in the weeds on that every single week when I'm writing up the primer for Fantasy Pros. And for me, it's always been a matchup based kind of attack and stuff. So I know a lot of people, everybody has their process, everybody has their way for attacking slates, finding plays, who they're going to be on, and stuff like that. For me, it's a lot of matchups as well as looking at the individual games themselves. So, really top down, looking at high totals, looking at also, and I think this kind of goes under the radar, Sia, that people don't talk about enough. Looking at pace and play volume, like
Mhm.
we want scoring out of the teams and out of the players that you put into a DFS lineup. Okay, well then we want to go to games and gravitate to games where a lot of scoring is projected to happen. So looking at Vegas lines, looking at the high totals, also looking at spreads and stuff and saying, okay, what is the story that I'm telling myself that how this game plays out? Does this team crush another team? And some of that you can go back to again the betting lines and looking at the spreads. And but not only that, looking at, okay, when this team is down, what do they do? Do they play slow? Do they play
Mhm.
fast? Do they throw a lot? And building correlated lineups and making correlated bets based off all of that. And it all comes back to stacking too, Sia. Like
Yeah.
you have to stack. And I think that stacking is paramount. But I will say this: there is optionality with runbacks. You don't always have to have a
Mhm.
run back. In other words, and then for people that are first time, if you're just now kind of tipping your toes into the water of DFS, stacking is correlating certain players with your quarterback in those games, building that out. So attaching 2 to 3 pass catchers, heck, maybe attaching the running back to your
Mhm.
quarterback, and the run back is choosing a player or two and on the other side, the opponent, and saying to yourself, if this game shoots out, if this game goes insane, then all I'm making is a correlated bet, and you're trying to lessen the things that you have to get right on an entire slate or a game, and saying, okay, look, I could make this 12 leg parlay, whatever, and the chances of all of that hitting are slim to none. But if I'm making correlated bets and I'm saying I'm picking out stacks, I'm making mini stacks of other games, then I'm lessening the things that I have to get right. And so that's how I'm approaching every single slate.
Yeah, lessening the things that you have to get right is a really interesting way to put that. I like that. Okay, so let's talk about the first couple of weeks, and specifically week one. We won't bring up the pricing yet, but we're going to do that in just a couple of minutes. Do you approach the first few weeks a little differently? And the reason I ask that, I feel like there's an obvious yes to the answer to that question, but I think some people listening might not appreciate that there's so much unknown. There's so much perception going into week one, even week two, week three, in terms of like how we think these teams are going to be, what their pace is going to be, what their quarterbacks are going to look like, and receivers, and just the style of play. But because it's an unknown, do you find yourself going maybe a little bit more contrarian the first couple of weeks with maybe, I don't mean full contrarian with the players, but I mean maybe picking on some games that have, like, let's say a 43-point total that you think, well, this game actually could be like should maybe be a 48.5 or 49. Because nobody's going to go here. They're going to go to all these other games. Let me do some lineups with this game too. Do you engage in that, or are you just going to the high totals?
I think I as I'm breaking down every single game and the matchups and stuff, I think I naturally get contrarian because with looking at the matchups and the matchup data and stuff like that, it will naturally lead me down contrarian roads that maybe the rest of the, not to say the rest of the industry, but maybe it's not the popular takes of the chalk games. I think that obviously the high total games are the ones that are going to get a lot of the puff and praise, and for good reason, on a weekly basis, especially early in the season. But really, that's something that plays out for the entirety of the season. You rarely will find like high total games where nobody's talking about them, or some of the players aren't amongst the most rostered players for any given slate. I think the way that I'm approaching the first few weeks specifically is the more information that we get throughout the season, the better that we're going to be able to build our DFS lineups, because you just have more information to go off of. And see, that's whether we're talking about defenses that are good, or how defenses are playing, or how teams and offenses are running, or are teams running a lot of plays like we thought they were going to, or are they playing slow? What injuries have made a giant difference in certain teams? So really, specifically for me, when I'm walking into the early weeks of the season and we have less information to go off of, we are shooting in the dark to a certain extent, because again, we're going to find out things about teams, whether good or bad, or certain data points or insights or usage. We're going to find out those and get better about understanding those the larger sample that we have, so the more games that we have played. For me, I walk into the first few weeks of the season understanding there's going to be even as much variance that we embrace in DFS, and some of that is, contrarian plays and whatnot. The variance that we're embracing is really, for me, it's ratcheted up because there's less that we know in those first few weeks. So honestly, my biggest takeaway for people for the first few weeks of the season is, whatever you play on a normal slate, whether that's $50, $1,000, $500, whatever, or even more, I play lighter those first few weeks because we just have less information. So I'm more willing to embrace the variance, but I'm going to be calculated about how I'm doing that with my bankroll, in knowing that, look, if it pays off, yeah, awesome. I may, bank a tournament, whatever. That's great. But there's also the increased likelihood of, okay, there is less that we know. Yeah. And so looking at bankroll management, I think, is very, very important, especially in those first few weeks where we have less intel to build smart lineups.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm glad you brought up the term bankroll management, because, listen, DFS can be a really tough game to play, whether it's NFL DFS or PGA DFS, which to me is even more tilting because, at least in NFL,
I can't.
At least in NFL, you can predict volume, or at least anticipate some volume. It doesn't work like that in golf. I love PGA DFS, but listen.
Man,
have you done that, DBRO? Do you?
I have. PGA? I have, and I'll say this, and the reason I didn't mean to cut you off, Sia, but like for me, go. I have to get it out there. My heart cannot take PGA. I can't take the 3 day sweat, man. Where it's like after day one, day two, before the cuts, and you're like, "Woo, baby, let's go!" And then you only make 3 out of 6 players through the freaking cut. You're like, oh, never mind. Lineup's dead. We had all this hope for nothing.
So in PGA DFS, there's a couple like checkpoints. One is Thursday morning. When I say checkpoints, I don't mean like where you're actually checking. I mean like where you have a barometer of where you're at. Thursday morning, you wake up, the tournament's already like 3-4 hours in. You notice, like, you look for all your guys and you're like, all right, one of them's like +6 or +5. You're out. Like, you're out. Or they're doing okay and you kind of know you're still in it. But then there's Friday afternoon. Or I should say Thursday night, where you're like, you can kind of gauge after round one. Then there's Friday afternoon where you're like trying to sweat making the cut. And if you have a guy miss the cut, like, sorry, your Saturday and Sunday aren't going to be as interesting. But if you can get those guys through the cut, that makes the weekend really fun. But it's really hard these days to do that. I'm filling out PGA DFS lineups as we speak for the upcoming tournament. But okay, so yeah, it's funny, your face that said it all. If you're watching this on YouTube, it absolutely said it all. Okay, let's do this. I want to talk about, because you talked about some game totals. I want to talk about the week 1 slate, and then we're going to bring up pricing. But I do want to point out that the highest game totals, as far as I can see, and this is subject to change, we got the Cardinals versus the Bills. And again, this is a 12-game slate, 8 games at 1 o'clock, 4 games at 4:05, 4:25. Arizona Cardinals, Buffalo Bills, 48. Jaguars, Dolphins, 49. That's the total there. And Texans, Colts, that's an interesting one, at 48. Can I ask you this before we bring up the pricing? Those are going to be 3 of the popular games. Is there a lower scoring total that and we'll get into this when we get into the pricing, but is there a lower scoring total that you think, well, that total's too low? I actually think this one's going to shoot out. Is there a game or two that you believe that to be true in?
There's 2 games, actually. One being New England versus Cincinnati, and I'm looking at the total right now on that, depending on the book that you're looking at, is 42 to 42.5 to 43. And the other game, and I think this game will be eventually, it's probably going to be looked at as contrarian right now. I think this game is probably going to be, the closer we get to week 1, it probably will be, I'm not going to say chalky, but I think it will be more popular despite the low total. But Washington and Tampa Bay also screams to me 2 really sneaky shootout games, and we can kind of get into it. But that total is at 41.5 or 42, depending on the book that you're looking at. But I love both of those games to be the sneaky shootouts of the week.
Yeah, that the Washington game is so interesting. I've looked at your Twitter. You drop so much, a lot of your stuff, all of your stuff is at Fantasy Pros, but you drop a lot of amazing knowledge on Twitter as well. And I'm a Commanders fan. I love the Jaden Daniels pick. Man. I personally thought he was the best quarterback in the draft.
He was
kind of a, thank you. Okay, good. Kind of a contrarian take, but I'm glad you support it as well. So if he can stay healthy, that Washington offense is very interesting. All right, we are going to bring up pricing. We're going to bring up Jaden Daniels pricing and a lot of heavy hitters, including Josh Allen there at the top. We're going to do it right after this message from our partners. We are back on Fantasy Football Today. DFS, my name is Sia Nejad. I am with DBRO, otherwise known as Derrick Brown. Give him a follow at DBRO. Follow him and all his content at Fantasy Pros. All right, DBRO, we're going to bring up the quarterback pricing. This is when my adrenaline starts to peak a little bit, because now we're in the phase. And we know, listen, we do content, we host shows, we do all those things. And this can be like a long slog, once you get to like week 15, 16. And so there are times where it can be like, I don't know, borderline like tiring. I don't know what synonym, but we are so fresh into this. I am so happy that I get to talk pricing with you. So let's just kick it off here. Pun intended. Top of the board, QBs. Let's just, listen, we don't have to go super comprehensive here. Let's just talk about some of the players we like, which will lead into some of the stacks and games we like. At the top of the board, we got Josh Allen. We got CJ Stroud, Dak Prescott, Tua, Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, who I think is very interesting at 6,400. But it starts with Josh Allen at the top at 8K. Any of those sort of top tier quarterbacks that are interesting to you, or do you find, or do you think, and again, it's early, do you think you're going to be paying down a bit at quarterback?
I think I'm going to be paying down. Looking at how this slate kind of looks at, there's a lot of quarterbacks. Like, I think just looking at this and trying to project where most people are going to go, I think looking at the top of the board, Josh Allen, CJ Stroud, and you know this as well as I do, Sia, but like I will say this also just to give context for people. When I say quarterback is going to be popular or chalky, they still are never that popular. This is not like
Right.
a player that's rostered 25, 30, 40%, stuff like
Right.
that. That's not going to be the case. Like most quarterback, even the popular ones will never creep up above 12 to 15%. So even talking about a popular quarterback, it's totally fine. You can
Yeah.
just get different with how you stack your quarterbacks, or overstacking them or skinny stacking them, or getting different with your game stacks and things like that. Like I have no problems playing a popular quarterback, but looking
Mhm.
at pricing right now, I think Josh Allen will probably be popular, CJ Stroud, because the other thing with week one pricing, see, you know this as well, is it's softer.
Yeah.
So we're going to have market inefficiencies for how certain players, their price on certain DFS sites and what that looks like. And those prices are going to increase as the players perform throughout the season. So looking at some of this, like saying, oh, well, he's 8K. In week one, that doesn't matter. You're going to be able to
Mhm.
find plenty enough value to build really strong and sharp lineups and pay up for a lot of players that you want to play. But I think looking at this slate, Josh Allen, CJ Stroud are going to be probably popular. I think Kyler Murray and Anthony Richardson are going to be popular because, again, looking to the high total games.
Mhm.
Just quarterbacks in a nutshell, though, just again, we're looking at this early. The ones that kind of stand out to me, I really like Tua, Trevor Lawrence in another high total game. I mean, come on, how much of do you really have to squint to see the Miami Dolphins putting up a ton of points and
Yeah.
Jacksonville putting up a ton of points, considering Miami's defense is a shell of its former self walking into this year? So,
Mhm.
um, those two quarterbacks really jump out to me off the hop. Another guy, again, we talked about Jaden Daniels. I'll bring him up. That I think makes a ton of sense right now. And not to go too far off the path, but looking and listening to camp reports, if we get Justin Fields under center in week one, he could be extremely popular just because his price. I mean, he's at the freaking min almost. Sia, he's at
Yeah.
5K.
Wow.
So
Interesting. Let me ask you about a few guys, a couple of which you touched on, one that you did not. I do like Kyler Murray at 6,400. I do
mhm,
like Anthony Richardson at 6,300. I think I really like the Colts in that game. Like on Sportsline, I've already given out my NFL Week One pick, Colts to beat the Texans at home. It's +2 right now, so I took the money line at +110. I like the Colts to potentially win that division, not because I think the Texans are bad all
oh
of a
yeah,
sudden. I think Texans are very good. I just think the Colts are super underrated, and their division
agreed.
price is like +310, +330. With all that said, listen, it's nice to go into week one pretty much knowing Anthony Richardson's going to be healthy because obviously that was an issue for him last week. I think he's got some targets. We can talk about them. But also, I think Jonathan Taylor could have a good game. Not that I want to pair those two, but I do want to get a piece of that game. I do like the total. I think you can pair them. Don't get me wrong. I just prefer
Yeah.
probably not to either play JT or A Rich with, you can play him with Pittman. I'd love your opinion on maybe like an off receiver there, like a Josh Downs, or maybe even like a
mhm.
Jelani Woods. If you were playing Anthony Richardson, would you get cute with that, or would you kind of stick to a Pittman, a Rich, and would you throw in Jonathan Taylor there?
I'd like getting different with it, and I have no problem correlating quarterbacks to the running backs. We've seen enough different teams and considering how they
Mhm.
run, and people could say, well, look, like if that happens, if you're playing them, aren't you kind of taking away from the possible ceiling outcome of Anthony Richardson? Like, how does he smash and break the slate if Jonathan Taylor also runs for 2 touchdowns? Well, then you're just playing the outcome that the game just goes massively crazy and they
Mhm.
go over the big total that of this game. So if this team puts up 4 to 5 touchdowns, Anthony Richardson can score 2 of them on the ground, 2 of them through the air, and then maybe JT gets another one on the ground, or maybe two, and A Rich walks away with 3 total touchdowns with one, sparse or splice between the air and the ground. So really, you're just playing into the total and saying this game goes insane. So I think there's a
Mhm.
lot of different ways to stack that. I think a lot of people will be going to Michael Pittman in a lot of different ways. But for
Yeah.
me, you brought up Josh Downs. He's my favorite play out of that entire game, man. And the
Wow.
reason I bring him up and going back to matchup and coverage data, because looking at this, you had a Houston Texans defense, and I don't think they run a lot different because no big changes in the offense as far as schematically of what I think they do in this upcoming season. But they had the fourth highest too high coverage rate in the NFL last year, playing it at 56.6%, Why does this matter? Because in weeks 1 through 8, you're looking at target shares versus too high coverage. Josh Downs was freaking awesome, man. He had a 21.3% target share versus this coverage. It makes a lot of intuitive sense because the other thing, and I know a lot of people might not be familiar with coverage data, so I'll break this down just kind of in a nutshell real fast. Single high, you're only dealing with one safety deep. A lot of teams will force teams to respect the deep ball, or you see more deep shots through that. And certain players excel that depending on their roles in the offense. Too high coverage, you're seeing a lot of more underneath stuff. So slot receivers, tight ends, running backs getting involved because the defense is playing two safeties back and they're saying, you're not going to beat us over the top. So a lot of teams will play dink and dunk underneath. So you get these tertiary pass catchers involved, and Josh Downs running out of the slot for Indy is definitely one of them. And in that 8-game sample, Sia, he led the team with 2.16 yards per route run versus too high coverage. So Downs is a player that I love, and not to get off the beaten path, but two other quarterbacks we didn't bring up when I was kind of rolling through quarterbacks, but I mentioned I love the game, talked about Jane Daniels, but Joe Burrow is firmly in play. The other guy, if you're going to play down for this one, Jacoby Brissett, who I expect to be under center week 1, I freaking love him. Because if he does pay off, he's going to carry 1 to maybe 2 pass catchers with him because you're not expecting a ton of rushing with him in a game that I think is the sneaky shootout. And he opens up the entire board for you, again, because he's only freaking 5,100, Sia.
Interesting. And so I'm just curious, if somebody were to go with a stack of Jacoby Brissett, is Polk in play? I mean, we need more with preseason, but like, who would you stack Jacoby Brissett with?
Assuming health, because I know he's been dinged up a little bit. Pop Douglas would be one of the guys I would, because we know his role is probably going to be pretty solidified. He's going to be the starting slot wide receiver. And then the rest of the pieces were like, I don't know who's going to play. But the 2 players that I love, one of my favorite plays of the slate, if I was building Jacoby stacks, I would add on Pop Douglas possibly, but the first player I would click in that game would be Hunter Henry. He's going to be probably my favorite week 1 tight end play of this slate. And I know it's early, Sia.
Yeah.
But I want to highlight this for people. Again, we're talking about the variance, and there's so many things that we don't know about the week 1 slate, week 2, week 3, until we get data points and sample sizes to we could say, okay, here's the usage. I can definitively tell you over multiple seasons, the defensive coordinator for the Bengals has not changed. The personnel has changed a little bit, but looking at it schematically, they are probably going to be a bottom 5-6 team versus tight ends. And this is stretched over multiple seasons. Over the last 3 years, Sia, last year, they gave up the 4th most fantasy points per game to tight ends. The year before that, the 9th most receiving yards to tight ends. The year before that, the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Hunter Henry might seem like a player that's not really sexy for this week 1 slate. I absolutely love him, and he's not going to be popular.
Very, very interesting there. I do like that play. A lot of people are going to choose probably to pay up at tight end with like a Dalton Kincaid at 5,800, Trey McBride, all good plays, of course, 6,100. And frankly, the Josh Allen stacks, you can offset the Josh Allen price with Kincaid as your primary receiver, if you will, but also Khalil Shakir, I believe, is in that like 5,100 range. So a lot of people will be comfortable with those Josh Allen stacks, knowing that you can kind of pay down with the pass catchers. All right, let me ask you, before we go to running backs, let me ask you about one more quarterback. And I do like Kyler Murray, by the way, because I think this secondary for the Bills, it's transformed. I don't know about this defense, DBRO. I think this defense can get exposed. I think you could play Marvin Harrison. I think potentially Michael Wilson's in play, but I think either Harrison or McBride, or both potentially, but probably just one for me, stacking with Kyler and having a run back like a Khalil Shakir, again, depending on how camp goes, or Dalton Kincaid. I think that's a pretty solid play as well. But the one I wanted to ask you about was Deshaun Watson at 6,000. This is one of those unknowns where I do kind of want to be early and take the chance, because I don't know that he was fully recovered from. There's a lot going on with Deshaun Watson, but in terms of like things we can actually potentially see, I don't know that he was fully recovered from his shoulder issue last year. If he is fully recovered, and this Dallas defense is good, but there's some gaps in this Dallas defense. There's some DBs that take chances. 6,000, you pair him with let's say Amari Cooper? Is this on your radar at all? I mean, because we know he can run a little bit too. Is it a no? That's fine if it's a no. I'm curious.
You're building up a really good case for him, and I hate to be the wet blanket on the show here, but that's probably one of the games that I'm probably going to fade. To be honest, I don't have a lot of faith in Watson. I think he's a good contrarian call, but again, I think there's other ways that I'll probably attack the slate that are contrarian and pay down and stuff. I think the way that I'll probably most likely attack that game is because of, again, going into the variance and saying we don't know certain things. Cleveland has been beat. Their defense is probably going to be extremely freaking good versus the pass.
Yeah.
But they have been beat in recent years versus the run. So I'm probably more likely to, if I'm going to attack that game, I'm probably either going to play one of the two ground games and probably pair the running back that I go with, probably whether it's, and the names that jump out to me right now are Jerome Ford or Rico Dowdle, and pair them with the correlating defense and probably just play it that way, that the game shoots the under and it disappoints. It's probably not going to be a fast-paced game, although we are hearing some stuff out of Cleveland that maybe they run with a higher pace. So from a pace perspective, I do think that's a really sneaky game.
Yeah, I know. I was looking at your Twitter earlier. I know Rico Dowdle is somebody you're big on.
Yes.
I thought he looked more like, even when Tony Pollard was on the team. Obviously, Tony Pollard's still kind of shaking off that bad injury from the season prior. But Dowdle was explosive. Yeah, I mean, just real quick, you're big on Dowdle maybe taking over that backfield. Is that right?
Yes, I am. I'm big on Dowdle. Look, Dowdle has been a McCarthy fan, or McCarthy has been a Dowdle fan, should I say it that way? McCarthy has loved Dowdle for multiple years. The problem is Dowdle has been banged up, man. Like, he's not been able to stay healthy. This year, he looks like he's in great shape. He's having a wonderful camp. I think if you're looking at it and just, I mean, would you be that surprised, Sia, if we look back on this season and at the end of the year we say, seriously, we faded Rico Dowdle based off of Ezekiel Elliott at this point in his career? Like, that's not a hard story to tell yourself that, like, okay, wow, you know, at this juncture of his career, the younger, more explosive player took over the backfield, and we should have never been that worried about Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is that as we talk about pricing, you know, unfortunately, there are going to be camp injuries, and not necessarily devastating ones, but, you know, growing strains and hamstring strains. And I see Dowdle here at 4,600, and I know Zeke is going to play in that week 1 game, but I could just see Zeke tweaking something and Dowdle being the guy, and him being the chalkiest guy on the slate just because he's 4,600 and he's the starting running back. So those are things.
Or if you're playing that game out in your head, do you form a mini stack and say, okay, look, is Zeke in play if Dallas is up? Sure. Could you go that ugly and nauseating route? You could. The other way that you could play that game out in your head and saying, okay, what if Cleveland gets up and Zeke comes off the field, Dowdle plays passing down snaps, he's the guy that's in for the second half or most of the game, and then you go, how am I going to correlate this? Probably not 2 running backs, because chances of that hitting, you know, Sia, are just slim to none. It happens, but it's very rare that where you game stack a game and you pick both the running backs. But saying you go with Dowdle and one of the pass catchers for Cleveland, pick your flavor, Amari Cooper and a revenge narrative, makes a lot of sense as far as the mini stack.
Yeah, speaking of passing work, let's transition to RB, because you mentioned a game. Listen, we got Jonathan Taylor at the top. I do love Jonathan Taylor. I can play that game either way. I could stay away from the game too, but I could play that game either way with JT or Anthony Richardson. Again, you spoke to how you can play both. I think he's a very, very solid play. As I kind of go down the board, I'm not in love. Like, listen, I think James Cook, you can make the argument for him. Certainly.
I love him.
We'll get to him in a second. Then there's the Rachaad White at 6,300. You mentioned that Washington game. I was already on Rachaad White potentially, just because I think he's just going to get a lot of work in the passing and the running game. So let's stop there in that sort of 6,300 and above range that includes Rachaad White. It sounds to me like, is James Cook your favorite, or are there other guys in there you love?
I love James Cook. I'm going to love him. I know I'm going to love him for week 1. And I mean, again, how we're expecting people to gravitate to that slate. We talked about, I think Josh Allen is probably going to be popular. Okay, well then the easy leverage point, if Josh Allen comes in popular and any of his pass catchers kind of catch some steam, you know, everybody plays the narrative of okay, start your tight ends versus Arizona. Okay, well, that's been a good narrative to play up. But what if that's not the correlation you need to be looking at for the Arizona Cardinals? What if it is going against their ground game or their run defense? And last year, and again, taking stuff into context for how things can change year over year, different personnel and stuff. The other thing I want to throw out there for people is look at the extremes to begin with. The really, really stinking good teams versus the run versus the pass, or the extremely bad teams versus the run and the pass. The likelihood of bottom 5, bottom 6 teams to increase the chances where they're going to be a really good team as far as a defense versus either one of those aspects is probably not going to happen. The bottom cellar dweller teams, like even if we're talking about variance here, say like, okay, these teams get better at defending the run and the pass. It's probably more likely an outcome that maybe they become middle of the road teams and not stellar versus any of these things. You look at the Arizona Cardinals run defense, they were terrible last year. They gave up the 8th highest explosive run rate. They were bottom 12 in stuff rate and missed tackles forced allowed. So looking at James Cook, and we don't think he's going to get a lot of touchdowns, a lot of red zone usage. Everybody might want to play Josh Allen in a high total game. He's the easy leverage point in saying, guess what? The actual amazing matchup that you're so worried about is on the ground. So what if Joe Brady, which he showed once he took over play calling duties last year, decides, okay, guess what? We're going to run the freaking ball, and it's not Josh Allen getting the goal line looks, but maybe it's James Cook. Or if you want to go really off the beaten path in a Millie Maker lineup, maybe you plug in Ray Davis.
Wow. That's special. Okay. So let's go down the board a little bit. There's a couple contrarian plays. I did mention Rashad White. Aaron Jones, I think, is interesting at 6,500. I think that game is interesting too against the Giants. I think people will want pieces of that game because there are some high flyers. We'll talk about Malik Neighbors in a second. Zach Moss at 5,800. I think is at least an interesting play. Anybody in that low 6K or 5K or even 4K range that you like?
Ramondre Stevenson, again, going to a game that I love. Cincinnati's run defense has been not great over multiple years. And again, drawing parallels, plus they lost some of their D tackles. DJ Reader is gone and stuff. So I think that's a team that could get exposed very early, very quickly. And if you're not playing Jacoby Brissett, I love Ramondre Stevenson on this slate. I
agree with you there, by the way. And that's a nice price point too. I think he's going to end up, not that it's a bad thing. It's not going to be super chalk necessarily, but I think some people, now that you mention it, are going to be on Ramondre. I think that's a great
He could be a $5,900 bell cow.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Who else you got?
Just looking at other games, both the backs and stuff, or the guys in Denver make a lot of sense. Whether it's Javonte or you want to go Jaleel McLaughlin, looking at that game, that's another game that could be a sneaky shootout as well. Not so much I'm not really in on Denver as far as the offense and stuff, but really, again, if Seattle comes out humming, like, okay, how do we see that game possibly projected out? And I know there's a lot of changing parts and pieces. And again, we would be really stepping into the variance with that one because new OC, new head coach, defensive side should be totally different. But in that game, if we do see the things with all this Ryan Grubb stuff where it's like, are they going to throw more? Are they going to throw deep down the field? Okay, well, Patrick Surtain might shadow one of these guys. What happens to the other guys? So taking an older player in week one, and again, looking at it, when you want to play veteran players, like some of these aging players, the time that you really want to do that is a lot of the early season stuff when they're fresh, they're not banged up, the toll of the season is not taken. It's unfortunately, it hasn't sitting here and worn them down to where the effectiveness drops off. So I don't hate going with a Geno Smith, looking at some of these running backs, whether you want to play Seattle gets up, and then maybe it's Jaleel McLaughlin day to just catch checkdowns for the entire second half.
It's so interesting because Geno was one of the quarterbacks that I considered as like an interesting contrarian-ish play. And part of the reason I considered that was because DK Metcalf is only $6,200. Like we that's just a really low price on DK Metcalf. And that doesn't mean he's going to explode and pay off his price. But, of course, JSN and Tyler Lockett are in these conversations too with Geno. But even if you don't stack Geno, like we may as well transition to receiver because I do want to talk about DK Metcalf real quick. Rashad White, somebody you're interested in playing, or that game that you think is going to be a little higher scoring than people think. Are you really looking at the pass catchers?
I'm looking more at the pass catchers, although I do think Rashad White is a very interesting call. Looking at him on that week one slate, I like him. I do have some worries about how much Bucky Irving is going to play, but again, stepping into the uncertainty, Rachaad White's a really good call, Sia, because if he gets that same role that he's had for, all of last year, and he is playing 80 to 90% of the snaps, then again, we're talking about a back that is way underpriced for week 1.
Yeah, and this Washington defense, listen, they lost a lot of pieces last year.
Yep.
They've got some issues. They certainly upgraded, but they've got some issues. I feel like Shane Daniels could have a great game, but that Washington defense could have a pretty bad game, and that those kind of correlate with each other, obviously, in a good way from a DFS standpoint. All right, let's go to receiver. Tyreek Hill at 8,700. I mean, I don't know how you make the argument against Tyreek Hill. I truly don't. But you can feel free to try. CeeDee Lamb at the top. I think I'm going to avoid that at Cleveland just because of the price and other options I want to go to. But I don't know. Maybe that ends up being contrarian because people, as much as they love CeeDee, aren't necessarily on him. Probably not. Justin Jefferson against the Giants. I think that's a super interesting game. I think Jefferson is an interesting run back to like a Daniel Jones, Malik Neighbors stack. Just throwing that out there. And then we go down the board. We see Devontae Adams. We see Mike Evans. We see Marvin Harrison Jr., who I think some people want to play at 7,200. Nico Collins, Keenan, who I have no interest in. Then there's that Michael Pittman, who we talked about. In this top sort of tier, anybody jumping out to you?
2 guys jump out to me because I think a lot of people, I'm not going to say they're going to rush to play CeeDee Lamb, but I think if people are going to be paying up on this slate, again, the other part about this is people love to click names that they just want to play the players and stuff. Yeah. So I think like a lot of the offseason hype, I think Marvin Harrison Jr., if people gravitate to that game, they're going to automatically gravitate to him. Yeah. I think that if people are paying up the top of the board, they're more likely to go with CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, maybe Mike Evans if that game does get more popular than we think, Sia, and Marvin Harrison Jr. The 2 top names at the top of the board. Outside of Tyreek Hill, love him. You could play him anytime. He'll probably be popular just because he's freaking Tyreek Hill. So I like Jalen Waddle actually more in that game just for the leverage. Because he'll probably come in like half the roster percentage. And I know that I'm just saying this off the top of my head, but see, just envisioning this slate, that's probably what's going to be happening. Yeah. Like Tyreek Hill probably comes in somewhere around 20-25%. Jalen Waddle probably comes in like half that, maybe 12%. Right. So I will take that leverage all day. But the 2 wide receivers that I really love and stand out, again, going back to these games, Justin Jefferson makes a ton of sense. What have we been seeing? Okay, we just take some of this training camp stuff out here, okay? Malik Neighbors has been cooking the Giants' corners all freaking camp. Okay, people are already asking the question, is that Malik Neighbors or is that how bad the Giants' corners are? What if it's both? It's both. What if it's because he's that damn good as well as the corners are that bad? Justin Jefferson is going to eat. Look, Jordan Addison, we don't know if he's even going to play in that game. What if he gets suspended? What if he doesn't? I don't think he's particularly amazing anyway, but TJ Hawkinson's going to be out of that game. Justin Jefferson, you don't have to squint very hard to sit here and write yourself a narrative where he gets 15 targets in this game, and he absolutely just obliterates their secondary. But as far as the top guys, the 2 guys that I like the most are Justin Jefferson, and again, going back to the sneaky shootout, Jamar Chase. You don't have to if New England continues to do what they've done in previous years, and I know that the changeover of the coaching staff, but again, Gerard Mayo's been there, he's played there, things like that. If they continue to be a heavy man coverage team, which New England over the last few years has been top 5, top 6 in man coverage rates, Jamar Chase is absolutely going to eviscerate them.
Are you okay with playing Jamar Chase on one side and Ramondre on the other side and not stacking Jamar Chase?
Yep, I'm totally fine with that. Yeah,
because I feel like that's kind of the play for me, and then I pay down a bit at
or play the mini stack. Play the mini stack. Play Mondre, Hunter Henry, and Jamar Chase as a mini around your game stack. So again, you're trying to lessen the number of things that you have to get right. Yeah. So when I'm making lineups, and this kind of comes to a bigger point where we'll discuss later in the show, when I'm making lineups, it legit, when I'm filling out a lineup, I want my main game stack of the quarterback as pass catchers, any run backs, and you don't have to have run backs, but having that main game stack, I'm filling in mini correlations, aka 2 wide receivers in the same game on opposing teams, or a running back and a wide receiver and a tight end, things like that, where you're correlating 2 players on opposite sides of the ball and saying, okay, if that game shoots out and they're the players that go off, then again, I'm making these correlated bets. So I just lessened to, okay, to smash a DFS lineup, I've got to get 8, 9 things right. Okay, now I've only got to get 3 things right. This game shoots out, those are the players that go along. That game shoots out, those are the players that smash. This other game shoots out, and we are golden, dude.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that is the train of thought you need to engage in. And if you diversify your portfolio too much and you just play like every end, you're just going to be basically paying the rake. Like that's just a hard way to win. So you got to focus on getting it right and getting it right for 1 or 2 weeks out of the entire DFS year. I think that's what people don't appreciate. You're going to crash and burn a lot of these weeks because tournament style DFS in any sport is really hard. But if you get the right correlation on the right week, that pays your entire year. That's how
takes 1 week. Takes 1 week, baby. 1 week to make an entire DFS season. You take down a massive tournament, positive ROI, unless you just do stupid stuff with your bankroll.
100%. All right, let's talk about some of that DK range, or even like Amari Cooper, who again you're probably not on at 6,400. A definite contrarian play, but we go to DK Metcalf at 6,200. I'm just going to name a few names. We could name 1,000 names and make this a 2-hour show if we wanted to. Malik Neighbors at 5,900. Pickens, who a lot of people like, at 5,700. Christian Kirk in that Miami Dolphins game at 5,500. Certainly like him. Khalil Shakir 5,100, and then we'll stop there. Maybe we'll get some 4K guys before we move to tight end. But any of those names or any other names in that like mid 6 to low 5K range?
I like the ones that kind of stick out to me. Chris Olave makes a lot of sense going against Carolina. Looking further down the board, again, I like DK, like Jalen Waddle, especially Waddle as far as leverage off of Tyreek Hill. Chris Godwin in the same, because I don't know how Washington's defense is going to play. Like, Dan Quinn played a ton of single high last year for the Dallas Cowboys as far as like how he had their defense, a lot of man coverage. I don't think he has the corners to do that this year. So I don't think they're going to be extremely man heavy. Like, he just doesn't have the guys. So the thing is, if I knew Washington was going to be a heavy single high team, then I would be telling you to jam in as much Mike Evans as you possibly can. But I don't know if that's going to be the case. I don't have a lot of faith in their corners. So if that's the case, what if they come out and they play a lot of too high coverage? Chris Godwin might be one of the best plays in the entire freaking slate, Sia. So love Chris Godwin. Looking down the board a little bit more. Again, Terry McLaurin from the same game. You talked about Christian Kirk. I think if we're looking at a lot of people saying, okay, in this high total game, what am I going to do? Am I going to play Nico? Am I going to play Stephon Diggs, who are very, very similar in price? What if the real answer is you should play a ton of Tank Dell and Josh Downs and take the more contrarian route of that game? That wouldn't surprise me. If Tank Dell leads them in receiving yards in week 1, I would not be shocked at all. So really like him. Talked about Tyler Lockett. Deontay Johnson, for his target volume, is extremely underpriced. Just as far as the guys in the 5K range. And then I'll throw in JSN. We already talked about Downs. And before we get too far into the 4K range, Curtis Samuel, another guy that could go way under the radar as far as his role for the team. Buffalo has done a lot of weird things year over year in the red zone. And the other thing about it, okay, fine. You want to play the narrative? Okay, well, fine. James Cook doesn't get the rushing attempts inside the 5. What if it's Curtis Samuel? What if he gets a jet sweep? What if he gets touch passes? It doesn't take a whole lot for me to tell you that, like, okay, could you really envision Curtis Samuel walking out of week 1 with 2 total touchdowns? He catches 1 through the air, and then he runs another one in? I won't be surprised at all.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Curtis Samuel makes that, like, as intrigued as I am by Curtis Samuel, he makes the whole situation a little bit muddled because he's a little bit more dynamic than what we saw from Washington. He was injured a lot in Washington, but I don't think Washington really showcased him in the way that he could have been showcased. And perhaps the Bills are going to do that. Okay, so before we move on to tight ends, I see Ladd McConkey at 4,700. He does have the foot issue. That's obviously something to monitor, as is how, by the way, the Bills utilize Curtis Samuel, what the coach speak is coming from that. These are things we need to pay attention to. Michael Wilson at 4,300. Brian Thomas at 4,700, I think is interesting because he is in that high scoring game. I don't know if you think he's going to have a lot of impact.
Gabe Davis, baby. You just told all I heard was Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis.
Talk to me.
Come on, like bad corners. If Ramsey shadows anybody, like who's he going to go after? Probably not Gabe. But, take out Brian Thomas Jr. They're highly
Right.
touted rookie. But how many times have we seen Gabe Davis break a slate? See, like
Yeah.
we know what his role is, man. And the other thing
Yeah.
about that is, okay, if you're going to go down to this lower part of it, you need to either be projecting with these lower priced wide receivers, one of two things. Either they have a high volume role that maybe a lot of people are not going to project. Okay, fine. Or if you're going to these lower range wide receivers, what is the role in their offense? If they're the deep threat, fine. Maybe they only need 3 or 4 targets and they house one of them and they come out as one of the best values of the entire freaking slate. Didn't we just describe in all of that I just said? Doesn't that just describe Gabe Davis? Like we know what his role is over multiple years. If he hits, it's probably big, and most of his targets are coming way down the field in a high total game.
Yeah, and they went out and got him too. So I mean,
Yep.
it's interesting because a lot of people will listen to that and be like, "I'm not playing Gabe Davis. Like he's so hit or miss." And it's like, yeah, that's actually the point, right? He's in a
Yep.
high scoring game, and if he gets that hit part instead of the miss part, that's potentially 2 touchdowns and 110 yards. Like we don't know what
Exactly.
that looks like, but the hit part is what you actually need. I mean,
And because of the bias, like what do you think he'll be? Just let's use our mind's eye here, Sia.
yeah.
And tell me, what do you think Gabe Davis's roster percentage will be in week 1?
It's not going to be above
2%?
4.5%.
3?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's
Yeah.
sub 5, definitely.
Yeah.
Sub 5.
Yeah. No, so you're 100% right. And that's the thing. Like, that's the cool thing about week 1 and week 2 is that because of that unknown, and like people are going to want to play some of these other names that are like they're justified in wanting to play them. And that leaves guys like Gabe Davis kind of just sitting out there at probably, you're right, 2.5, 3% tops. If not maybe a touch less. So yeah, really good point. And listen, as we approach the actual week 1, on this show, like DBRO won't be with us, but we'll have Mike McClure, we'll have Make Shop, and we'll be able to talk about what we're hearing and what we know about some of these lower end players in terms of the expectation in week 1. All right, let's talk tight end, DBRO. You mentioned a couple already. Hunter Henry, a great value. We got Trey McBride at the top at 6,100, Dalton Kincaid at 5,800, Evan Ingram, interesting in that high scoring game at 5,500. I just, for the sake of my Colts love this year, I wanted to point out Jelani Woods at 3,300.
Love Jelani.
You can pair him with. They always have so many tight ends on that team. That's
Jelani.
what I fear. But Jelani healthy, so Anthony Richardson stacks, maybe a throw in a Jelani Woods, what have you. But who do you like at the tight end position?
Right now, looking at the top down, I'm probably not going to play any Trey McBride. Buffalo has been elite versus tight ends over multiple freaking seasons, so I'm probably not going to care about him on this week 1 slate. Dalton Kincaid makes a lot of sense, but probably not going to go there. The guys that I do like, Evan Ingram, again, Miami was bottom basement versus tight ends last year. I'm really more likely to pay down and go super cheap on this slate. See, just depending on how, we're looking at this, how it shakes up. The guys that jump out to me, again, I already talked about Hunter Henry, probably my favorite tight end player the entire week 1 slate. The other guys that make a lot of sense to me is Noah Fant, because Denver last year gave up the most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Their defense has not changed that much. So Hunter Henry makes a lot of sense. So does Noah Fant. Again, revenge narrative, so we want to go down narrative street. And 2 other guys that are really boring but could be awesome vet plays. Again, talked about playing. If you're going to play the crusty, dusty veterans, then you need to do this in the early parts of the season when they're healthy. I love Ben Sinnott, but I'm telling you, probably Zach Ertz leads that team and routes run in week 1. If he, again, they're already talking about his red zone role and his third down role in this team. Zach Ertz is probably going to be at the top of my exposure list for week 1. But again, going to another high total game, probably my favorite 3 plays of this entire slate, Sia, are Hunter Henry, Zach Ertz, and Jonnu Smith. Jacksonville was terrible versus tight ends last year.
Oh, very, very interesting. All right. Zach Ertz. Yeah. What is it? 3,600. I don't hate that. I do like the upside of those 4K plays you talked about, the Hunter Henry and perhaps the Noah Fant as well. All right, well, I'll tell you what, that was Derrick Brown, DBRO. That was even better than I thought it was going to be. Like, you just dropped, I'd like to say we, but it was mostly you. That's why I brought you onto the show, by the way. You just dropped so much knowledge just generically about DFS, but also some specific plays that I know I'm going to be keyed in on. Listen, we're going to take a quick break. I do want to ask you, because we have 3 weeks of preseason coming up. I just want to ask you how you, just really quick points about how you attack the preseason slate, because it's a much, much different ball game. We're going to do that right after this message from our partners. We're back on Fantasy Football Today, DFS. And DBRO, before I let you go, I want to ask you just a couple preseason thoughts, because I remember last year when you were on our summer series, you had some preseason thoughts in terms of how to attack a slate where you don't even know, or at least the average person doesn't even know who's really playing. What's the approach as we have a few weeks where we can play NFL DFS or even bet on it if we want to?
Oh, man, yeah, I had a ton of bets out there on bettingpros.com for the Hall of Fame game. I will be doing preseason betting content and DFS stuff. All my DFS content for preseason will be in the Fantasy Pros Discord, so anybody can hop in there. But as far as the betting stuff will be at Betting Pros. But, dude, I'm all deep in the weeds. And looking at preseason stuff, it comes down to playing time. It comes down to monitoring reports from beat writers. And it could shift so dramatically, especially for DFS, right up to the moments of lock, where you're getting, okay, these players that we thought were going to play are not going to play. They're not in warm-ups. So really, it's staying in tune with playing time and the beat writers. And really, a lot of this comes to, okay, when you're looking at specific games, whether you wanted to play Showdown for an island game in preseason, or you're playing 2-game slates, 4-game slates, whatever, is looking at the beat reports and seeing who is playing, but also staying in tune with how all that's going right up to kickoff, and looking at the depth charts. Because again, if we're looking at playing time, then it matters if a team has 3 quarterbacks on their roster, but one of them is hurt. Okay, well then you're only going to get 2 quarterbacks playing in a game. Why does that matter? Because, okay, well, they have to spread the snaps across those 2 players. If one of those guys is the full-time starter, he might play a drive, 2, maybe 1 quarter of action. Then you're talking about 3 quarters for a quarterback. And I don't care if it's the most horrible quarterback in the NFL. If they're getting 3 quarters of action in preseason, they have a really good shot to hit the optimal lineup just based off of playing time and opportunities alone. So looking at playing time is massive. So just looking at the depth charts and knowing, does this team, how many quarterbacks are they going to dress or is going to play this week? How many wide receivers? How many running backs? And looking at that is going to lead you to good weeks in preseason DFS, because it all comes down. We always say this, Sia. Volume is king. You can't earn volume if you're not playing snaps. So we need to care about playing time. Talent factors in there some, and athleticism for these players, but playing time is the number 1 big edge.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, with preseason, you got to be dialed in like up to kickoff, right? And you mentioned it. You're in the Fantasy Pros and the Betting Pros. They can find you there in the Discord chat as well. But if you're not, like, don't play NFL DFS if you don't have the ability to be tapped into DBRO or be tapped into Twitter and kind of know where you need to look, who the beat writers are, or how you need to search. Because a lot of times you can use Twitter like as a search engine, right? And you can try to figure out, like, where to go, who to lean on for a particular game. It's actually not that hard to figure it out. But the point is, if you don't have the time to be dialed in pre-kickoff, you probably save your money or go to DBRO specifically and get his advice directly. Speaking of, I do want people to know where they can find you. So tell us your Twitter, but tell us also where you're putting your content out there.
Yeah, all things and stuff are at Fantasy Pros and Betting Pros. I will, again, be running it back. I'll be writing the weekly primer for Fantasy Pros. Some small changes in the primer coming this year. Not going to allude to too much of that, but some new wrinkles. I think people are really going to like it. I've changed up things for this upcoming season. So the primer will be back every week. I'll have prop articles every single week over at bettingpros.com, as well as I'll be in the Discord for both of them, posting my betting picks, prop picks, line sides, totals, all that kind of stuff in the Betting Pros Discord, as well as Fantasy Pros Discord. I'm in there answering questions. We're going to have live streams on Sunday 3 times a week as well throughout the week, and Tuesday through Thursday. And you can find me on every single social media outlet at DBRO_FFB.
At DBRO_FFB. I want to leave with this before we get out of here. Mm-hmm. I want to ask you, because you imparted a lot of wisdom, and feel free to just rehash one of the things you said. But for the listener that's engaging in NFL DFS this year, whether they're new or not, what would be one piece of advice? You mentioned bankroll management. You mentioned correlating plays and just kind of dialing in on things to lessening the things you need to get right. But what would be the one piece of wisdom, if not that you would tell the listener heading into this new NFL DFS season?
I would say, so 2 things we already mentioned that I don't think are my number one takeaway, but 2 things we mentioned early in the show. Stacking is always optimal. Run backs are optional. You don't have to worry about a run back. The one thing I'll say for people, and we have played this, and Sia, you've been in the DFS streets just as long as I have, so you understand this and you know this. We used to live in a DFS world where it was jam them in, pay up for the running backs, the guys that were getting these insane workloads, and some of that's still true with the Christian McCaffreys of the world. But the NFL is deploying more and more and more committees. So for me, last year, I went to prioritizing and jamming in wide receivers because I know their roles, I know their volume, I know their usage. I'm more likely to not say get cute, but embrace the variance of some of these committees. And in the game script that I'm telling myself, okay, it's a pass catching running back. Okay, well, this team's down. They're a dog, a 7.5 point dog this week. Okay, who do you think is going to get all the pass catching work when they're in down mode? Okay, maybe it's the pass catching running back. I'm likely to embrace the variance of these committee backfields because, again, if the touchdowns don't go to the supposed lead back and the game script flips, who's going to be getting the checkdowns? And especially you're talking about Sia. DK is PPR, baby. So why do we want to lean into that? So embrace the variance, embrace the committee backfields. And sometimes if everybody's swimming in one direction, go the other way.
Yeah, embracing that 1B also gives you the salary leverage to pay up at that wide receiver position over and over again for your lineup. So I think that's really, really good advice as we see this. It's, outside of Christian McCaffrey, it feels like this is kind of a deal for almost every single NFL team. So Derrick Brown, great stuff as usual. I know we'll have you back on this show sooner rather than later, but I appreciate you taking the time because I know how busy you are. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please make sure you're subscribed. Please make sure you reviewed this podcast, in particular, FFT DFS. We really appreciate it. And we really appreciate DBRO for joining us. We've got a lot more coming, folks. We got football coming. We are just 4 weeks away from it. Join us every single episode coming up on Fantasy Football Today DFS. Have a great day, everybody.